Hello everyone and welcome to another video here on the channel. Today we're going to be taking a look at this asset right here. In the last portfolio review, we got this submission by Nathan Lang, and during the review I told him that hey, this model actually looks quite nice, but the textures could use just a tad bit more work. So today I'm going to be showing you how we can approach this particular asset and make it go to the next level. Now, before we do that, I do want to thank every one of you for your support. This project is alive thanks to you and thanks to all of your support, your comments, your likes. Now, if you're not subscribed, because we know a lot of you don't subscribe, it could really help us for you to click this little button. We're very close to our next big milestone, which is going to be that 100k subs. So with your help, we're going to get there very, very soon. Let's go. Very well, so let's start with the process here with this element. How and what things can we improve to make this thing look a little bit better? Well, the first thing that I notice is the metal. In general, I feel like even though we're using a 4K texture, we're not really getting all of the nice, interesting effects that I would expect to see from the metals. So let's look at some reference. One of the things that you're going to notice in metals, especially if you want to make them, a little bit more interesting, is that they tend to have a lot of impurities. We need to position ourselves in this sort of old times, right? Like in the medieval times where it was pretty much impossible to get pure steel or pure silver or whatever. And one of the things that I notice here is that there's a lot of areas where we have this very super clean effect with the whole metal. So I'm going to go here, and thankfully Nathan has a great organization for his UVs. I'm going to go to the UV2, I'm going to go to the metal section, and I'm going to add a fill layer. And as you can see, this should fill most of my metals with this very nice fill layer effect. Now, the first thing that I notice is that the roughness of the metal seems to be a little bit too uniform. If I press the letter C and we go to the roughness map, I don't see too much contrast. Yes, I see a couple of areas that are a little bit less rough, but in general, most of these elements are very close to each other. So even though we have a nice light going on right here, I don't really see too much variation. So I'm going to use this fill layer. I'm going to fill it with a very weird color. This is one of the first tips that I want to give you. I'm going to go for this super weird dark green color right here. I'm going to add a black mask, and on this black mask, I'm going to add a fill layer, and this is going to be filled with something like a clouds. Or, you know what, there's other ones that are actually a little bit nicer, like this grunge concrete spots. And as you can see, this is going to give me a little bit of spots everywhere. We can play with the balance to add either more or less of this effect, but the trick is going to be when I insert something like an overlay mask. Why? Because the overlay is going to mix with the colors that we have underneath, and if we then push this thing slower into the colors, right, into the elements, we're going to be able to sort of dirty up this whole thing and get a very interesting result. And I know that he did it right here, Nathan did a little bit of that variation with those colors. I can see some of that engraving and carved lines, but it's always important, especially if we're doing this sort of old school elements or very old pieces, to go a little bit more in the exaggeration. Look at that, something like that is gonna look quite fine. Now, if we want to add hide information is also important. It's a good way to sort of add a little bit more variation. So I'm going to add a little bit of hide variation there to break up the general effect of the whole thing. Now, one thing that I'm noticing is that this layer that I just added is not present on this other metal pieces right here. And a very common mistake is when we're dealing with texturing, we sometimes forget to make sure that it's the exact same thing on both elements. So I'm just going to right click this thing. I'm going to copy this layer. So copy layers, and I'm going to go to UV1, go to the metal section of UV1, and over here I'm gonna right click and I'm gonna say paste layers. So what this will do, as you can see, is it's gonna bring in the exact same value, the exact same color, the exact same presence for the whole thing into our elements right there. So see how that, even though it might seem like a very simple a layer, it's already adding a little bit of extra variation to the whole thing. I don't think we're going to need hide information, to be honest, so I'm just going to remove it from both elements. And the reason why I'm going to remove this is because of something that we talked about recently, which is the level of detail. But one thing that I can do though is I can turn on the roughness, and maybe those spots right there, I can make them a little bit rougher, right? So as you can see, if I push the roughness here, especially here on the front, there we go, that's going to change, and it's going to look like a micro surface thing that's really breaking the surface of our element. If we go back to M, we're gonna have something that looks a little bit more interesting. This is a personal preference of mine, and that's with metals, especially again with old or damaged metals like this. This is supposed to be a crossbow that has gone into action, right? So for this kind of stuff, it is important to add a little bit of that variation, so that you don't always have a lot of surfaces that are very smooth and perfect. I'm gonna go here to the UV1 again, to this other one right here, turn on roughness 2, and push the roughness up so that again we get a little bit of that variation. That variation, my friends, I know it might seem like it's not that big of a deal, but it really adds to the realism that we want for our metals. Now, One of the big things that I noticed that this thing was missing was a general sort of like rust layer, right? Like rust is one of those things that we all love. It looks very, very nice, and right now I don't really see, especially like look at that cut right there between this element and the woods. Rust is one of those things that's always gonna help you with the whole thing. So I'm gonna go to the very top layers right here. I'm gonna look for rust. There's this I got this one actually, rust brown, from the library, but you can use any of the other ones. I like this one because it's relatively, again, like simple. And here's a cool thing that I'm gonna do. Right click, and I'm gonna do this option that says instantiate across texture sets. What this will do, in this case I'm gonna select UV2, I'm gonna say okay, is it's gonna use, or it's gonna sort of like copy this layer to other instance sets, so that anything that I do to this rust brown is gonna affect all of the other layers as well. Again, very useful, right? Because instead of having to go back and forth like I just did with the metals, I can just go in this one and modify. Now, first thing that I notice here, very, very common mistake, scale of the detail. Rust will never be as coarse like this, right? So I need to go to the tiling, and we have 4K texture, so let's really use this. Let's go all the way to like 4 on the tiling section, so that the size of the rust is really, really small. And rust usually tends to be something that is not as noisy in terms of height information. So I can go to the technical parameters, and I'm gonna bring the height range all the way down. I do want to have a little bit of height, but just like barely there. Again, very common mistake is people will try to add too much bumpiness on this kind of stuff, and sometimes having like very, very little like effect is better than exaggerating and making it super intense. I'm gonna add a black mask here, of course, and then I'm gonna add a generator, and we're gonna add a dirt generator, right? Like this is one of those generators that's always gonna make things like really, really interesting. I'm of course gonna bring the dirt level down. Like I don't want to have too much of this effect right here. I'm gonna bring the dirt contrast up because I don't want to have rust going across like the whole section over here. I just want it to be close to the crevices of what we have. And very importantly, blending modes, right? I mean, we can leave them like this, and as you can see, that's already going to give us an interesting effect, but it's always a good idea to try and find something like maybe the multiply, or sometimes an overlay. Overlay I don't like all the times because sometimes you might get like very bright colors. In this particular case, I think multiply is going to be best for us. And look at that. So now every single area where we have this sort of like connection between the different elements, we're going to have a little bit of that effect, right? We got to be very careful with this kind of stuff right here. So I'm going to add a paint layer, and I'm gonna see if it is possible to paint a little bit of the damage there, right? Like we don't want to see those like very horrible borders. And this is the part where the artistic hand comes into play, and we can really start like adding this kind of stuff. Now, some of you might be wondering or saying, well, yeah, I mean, this looks cool, but it's definitely, you know, like, for instance, we don't want to rust here beneath the rope, and you'll be totally right. Like, those are areas, like, for instance, all of this area right here where the arrow is going to be flying through, those are one of those areas that we really don't want to have that sort of, like, detail, right? So I'm going to remove that sort of, like, rust detail from those areas. But areas that don't move as much, for instance, this ring right here, which is very, very interesting, we definitely want to clean them up. Again, be very careful with those masks right there. Those are very horrible areas, and we always want to sort of like paint them in. Why is this happening, by the way? It's probably because of some of the bake information. Again, I'm not sure if all of this bake information was done here inside of Substance Painter, but sometimes we get like those like weird effects. And this is one of the next aspects that I want to talk about, which is the storytelling aspect of this whole thing. So for instance, here I'm going to grab my pen, and I'm just going to start like adding a little bit of that damage here on this like lower section of the element. And we can always sort of like push things down, right? Like add some like little trails or elements. A little bit of storytelling is always important to make sure that things look integrated into their particular like time period. So in this case, for instance, here, actually, let me go to my brushes. I'm gonna grab something like this Dirt 2 brush that I really like, and we can start like damaging or adding a little bit of damage over on this area right here. Substance Painter is such a powerful software. We even have a like full course about it, but it's important that you guys understand that the artistic side of things, right, like the hand of the artist, where we're actually going in here and adding this sort of information, that's one of the most important parts of the whole process. I can see, for instance, there's a little bit of damage on this element right here. Well, let's add a little bit of rust, not too much, right? Like we don't want to like overdo it, but it's important to just add a little bit of that kind of stuff. Now, I really like these details that Nathan added, like this eyes right here, as well as some of like the height information here for the moon and all of those elements. But once more, if we have all of these elements, it's important to understand that there's probably going to be a little bit of damage going into those areas as well. Now, I'm not entirely sure in which layer those elements are, but one thing that I know is that those live on the hide information, right? So if I go here to normal, hide, and mesh, you can see that the information is there. So one thing that I can do if I want to add a little bit more damage to those elements is go to a layer where they live and just right-click and create an anchor point from it. So now this metal layer is creating an anchor point. I need to do the same, of course, on this other folder right here. I'm going to go to the metals and create an anchor point. There you go. And once I have that anchor point, I can just create a new layer here. I'm just going to make it like a dark red layer at the very top of everything. You can see that right now it's only affecting all of those elements right there. I'm going to add a black mask, paint layer, and I'm going to paint the object where I know the engraving is. For instance, this guy right here and this guy right here. And I believe this guy right here as well. Add a new generator. This is going to be a dirt generator. And then I'm going to multiply this dirt generator so that it only affects the layers that I just selected, right? So as you can see right now, we're filling this layer with all of these elements right here. We can invert this, by the way, just like generate different effects. But the cool thing is we can go here to micronormal and look for that. Oh, actually, we do have some masks. Oh, this is great. Great stuff, Nathan. You already thought about this. So we should have the engravers. There we go. So we're going to be using the engraving edges that we have right here, engraving edges, to increase or incorporate a little bit of that dark color on these things right here. Well, it seems that's only on some of the engravings. Do we have another one? Symbols. There we go. Much better. Symbols it's looking a little bit better. There we go. That's what I was looking for. So as you can see, we're incorporating that little nice red color. So of course, this red color is not going to be this one. We can go to the same sort of like rustish color that we had right here. Probably increase the roughness as well to play a little bit with those effects. Multiply this and decrease the opacity a little bit. So that thing right there, I know it doesn't seem like much, but it really helps make those things pop a little bit more, because otherwise they look a little bit too shiny, too simple, right? So adding a little bit of that like extra contrast is a good way to really like showcase all of the amazing work that you did right there. Now, the one that I show you quite often, right, guys? I'm going to add a fill here, and I'm going to add something like, yeah, another grunge, for instance. Let's increase the tiling on the grunge a bit, and let's play a little bit with the balance. And I'm going to multiply this as well, so that now what we're doing is we're breaking up the detail, right? So instead of having this damage pretty much everywhere, I'm breaking it up, and we're only going to have it on certain parts of the elements. But we're still going to be able to get a little bit of that shadowy effect going across the whole thing. Now, the wood. Oh, this one is so cool. Like, you did a great job again with these things right here. I do think that the hide information is a little bit too much, so I'll probably try to remove a little bit of that. It's this damage right here. So the reason why I don't love this one right here is because the colors look like just painted on top of the whole thing. And also, I feel like the hide information is a little bit too much. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to keep the color, but I'm going to change the blending mode to linear dodge. And what linear dodge is going to do, as you can see right there, is it's going to really push the values. I actually usually like to make this a little bit more of a light yellowish tone, something like that, and it's going to give us a little bit of a nicer effect. The problem with this is it looks too grainy, and usually when wood like breaks or splinters, it generates like sharper, cleaner cuts. I'm gonna add another paint layer right here. Don't be afraid to have like complete areas where we're missing like big chunks of wood right here. Definitely gonna desaturate this a little bit more, so we don't want to have it as saturated. There we go. And another thing that I would like to add here is a little bit of damage on the corners. Remember, the corners are always the areas that are going to get damaged the most. So this thing right here, I'm still like, I'm not sold on the hide information on this one, so I might just remove the hide information and leave it with just like a very simple hide. How much hide do you have right here? Yeah, so it needs to be like very subtle, because we don't want to like overdo it with this particular thing. Now I'm gonna add another layer here. I'm gonna grab or sample the same sort of like soft color, add a black mask, and I'm gonna use a soft brush with this one, because one of the things that I want to do is, if this like crevice right here is where the arrow is gonna be sort of like flying through, right? Like, I would expect there to be a little bit more damage on that particular area. So once I have that, I'm gonna do something like a linear dodge. See that? So we create like a little bit of an exit part here for the whole thing. And then, of course, we can play with the opacity, right? Like, it doesn't have to be like perfectly opaque, but I would like to see just a little bit more variation there on the elements. Now, I'm going to go back to the baker. Remember I mentioned that we were missing some bakes right here? So I'm going to go back to the bakes. And as you can see, we don't have high poly. That's fine. I'm just going to use low poly mesh as high poly. And we actually don't want to get anything. The one that I'm mostly concerned about is the thickness map. So I want to try and see if we can bake a thickness map from these elements right here. I'm going to bake the selected textures. And yes, as you can see, we do get a nice thickness map right here. And the reason why I want to show you the thickness map is especially with wood. Wood is one of those materials that can benefit from a little bit of surface scattering, because wood is a little bit of organic, right? Like has a little bit of organic matter to it. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to add a new fill layer. And I'm going to use a very obvious color for now. I'm just going to use a red color right now. And once I have this, I'm going to add a black mask, right click, I'm going to add a fill layer. And on the fill layer, I'm going to look for the thickness map that we just baked. So it should be this one right here, if I'm not mistaken. There we go. Then I need to add a levels, and I'm going to invert the levels. And what we can do is we can push these things right here, and look at that. We can get a little bit of this sort of like soft surface effect on the corners and on the thin areas of our wood. Of course, I'm not going to leave this with red. I'm probably going to go for like an orangey tone, orangey vibe, something like that. And then I also like to set this to linear dodge and play a little bit with the information here so that it's not too obvious. See how that layer right there really makes the whole thing sort of like pop a little bit more, especially on this areas right there. It's one of those things that it might not look like much, but it can really incorporate a little bit of that complexity to the whole thing. So I really like how this is looking. I think, again, these are simple changes. Like your asset was already quite nice, but these are just like things that I think can help you elevate this piece to the next level. Personally, I would add a little bit more grime and dirt and scratches and just more complexity to the whole thing. But again, I'm gonna respect the artistic decision that you want or you're following right here to keep this as sort of like stable as possible. But I do want to show you how to improve the presentation a little bit. Now, what do I mean by presentation? This presentation right here, this breakdown, this bakes, these are fine, the UV masks are fine, but I feel like especially this sections right here, we're missing something. Like it looks, I'm not sure if it's only me, hopefully you guys can agree, but it does look like it's a little bit like, you know, like this sort of like a very CG old school element. So let me show you how I would approach this to just give it a little bit more of an interesting look, especially with this one. Like this one, I remember mentioning during portfolio review, I strongly recommend you take this one out. It just looks so fake, right? Like it looks like in like a PlayStation 1 or PlayStation 2 game. So I would strongly recommend that you remove that one, because other than that, we have a very nice effect right here. So of course, I'm going to export the textures real quick. I'm going to do PBR metallic roughness, nothing fancy here, and let's just export real quick. And let's go to Marmoset. Now, before we continue, I know you guys are not subscribed. We have the information. So if you like these videos and you're learning, which is the most important thing, please subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. And let's continue. So inside of Marmoset, I'm gonna, of course, import our FBX. Thankfully, this thing should already give us the two materials that we want, UV1 and UV2. So for those of you that are new to Marmoset, the setup is very simple. For instance, here in UV1, I'm just gonna grab base color, and base color goes into base color right there. Then normal map goes into normal map. Of course, very common issue sometimes is that the normal map looks inverted, like it's pushing out instead of up instead of down. You might need to flip this UV to get the proper one. In this case, yes, we do need to, I do believe we need to flip it to get the proper effect. So that should be it. And we're going to get, of course, the roughness here into the roughness map. So that's going to give us the proper roughness for this thing, which again, looks quite nice. I love the variation that you added on the roughness, my friend. Finally, we of course need to add the metal. So metallic map right here. It's going to tell which elements are supposed to be metal. And there we go. As you can see, with this done, all of our textures are ready. So I'm gonna again follow your line in the way you were presenting stuff. So dark background, totally agree, that's a good idea, but let's work a little bit more on the lights. So first of all, I'm gonna go here to sky, and I'm gonna bring the backdrop brightness all the way down. I'm going to change the HDRI. I've mentioned this before in one of the shorts. The HDRI that we use is going to be very important for the kind of result that we want. So in this particular case here inside of Marmoset, for instance, we have some like old school looking elements like this alley trees. I'm just going to use that one right there. And as you can see, this is going to give us again a nice, interesting sort of like warm color to the whole thing. I'm going to bring the backdrop brightness all the way down. That sounds like a tongue twister. And once we have that, I never like my HDRI to be the main star of my sort of like render setup. So I'm going to bring it down for now, just a little bit. And I'm going to start sort of like lighting this thing. For this type of asset, since they're sort of like just a prop, I do like to use the same principle that they use for car renders. If you've ever seen car renders, they usually have this like super big light on top of them that allows the highlights and everything to just look super nice. So I'm going to do the exact same thing. I'm going to create a spotlight here on the top of the whole thing right there. And I'm going to start increasing the brightness a little bit. I'm going to increase the diameter, and very important, I'm going to increase the spot angle. So as you can see, that sort of like gives me a very nice, interesting light across the whole surface. Then I can go back to my sky and I can start bringing in a little bit of that light to further sort of like illuminate the whole thing. And now we can use a little bit of our dramatic lights. So for instance, one of the lights that I want to add is a very nice sort of like light coming from below. Let's increase the brightness there a little bit. There you go. Increase the diameter. Soften the shadows. Remember, the diameter of the light is going to soften the shadows. and I'm gonna sort of like bring it down. I'm gonna go to the main light. I'm gonna bring the brightness up a little bit more. There you go. So as you can see, we have this sort of like double exposure kind of thing. I'm gonna start like playing around with some of the rotations, especially with flat surfaces. If you have a light that's parallel to the flat surface, it can look a little bit weird. So we always want to sort of like twist them around or sort of like move them around to get more of a bounce light effect. Metals are tricky, by the way, to light. They're not like the easiest thing, but if you do it properly, you can get some really nice effects. That's why the HDRI is so important. And finally, of course, rim light. Everyone loves a good rim light, so I'm gonna go all the way to this side right here. Another spotlight. There we go. And that one's gonna be really bright, right? It should be quite bright, like maybe not that much. It should be quite bright. Never overexposing things, but just in a good way so that we get an interesting sort of like shine on the back part of the whole thing. Remember, the diameter of the lights is gonna be quite important for the softness of the shadow. So for instance, here I see a couple of like really harsh shadows. I need to see which one it is. This one right here. So we might want to increase the lightness there. There you go. That's going to soften the shadows quite a bit on that particular part. And if you ever need to add more lights, feel free to do that. For instance, right now, I feel like this part right here is looking a little bit too like dark. So I'm going to go over in this section. I'm going to add another light, and I'm going to add an omni light. Omni lights are just like this, like very nice, like interesting light bulbs. And I can just add a nice little omni light right there to sort of like shine some more information on the whole thing and bring me a little bit more complexity. Definitely going to decrease the lightness, so I don't want too much light, just a little bit right there. And we can also increase the diameter to get like a softer shadow. Here inside of Marmoset, well, first of all, I'm going to make sure that I'm in high DPI. Yeah, there we go. I even have like a upscaling there. And I can do Control U to hide the lights. And this is what we're going to be able to see. Now, one final thing, of course, that we can do is turn on ray tracing. Ray tracing is going to sort of like push this into the next level, and it's going to give us a little bit more of a realistic bounce. But that's not it, because as you can see, this one right here is actually really close to what we had on the Nathan's render. So that's perfectly fine. Like for a normal sort of like traditional render, this is going to give us a good result, a good setup. But here's what I want you to do, my friend. First of all, I'm going to go to the main camera here, and I'm going to see if any of the other tone mappings might be giving me a better result. Linear is the most sort of like usual one, but as you can see, it looks a little bit too flat. AGX is the one that a lot of people are using nowadays because it sort of like brings the exposure down and it's not as contrasty. ACES is actually quite nice with this one. I think it gives that sort of like interesting push. And one of the things that we can do is just increase the exposure a little bit, and it's gonna look, you know, a little bit more juicy, right? Like here, I know that the colors look a lot more realistic, but especially for presentation purposes, this is one of those things that you can really use. And for instance, I can push the highlights down. Another important thing, make sure to sharpen stuff, right? By default, renders tend to sort of like smooth and soften things quite a bit. So sharpening things can be a very good way to add a little bit more, again, complexity to the whole scene. Vignette is okay, like I like to add it sometimes. In this case, I don't think it's really or particularly needed, but it's one of those things that we can do to just like incorporate a little bit more visual interest to the whole thing. Now, I feel like this thing right here, we can definitely subdivide. Don't be afraid of subdividing stuff. Like, I don't know if here, it looks like you did subdivide. I'm going to add a couple of subdivisions. Now, this is interesting because on this render, for instance, I see a very sharp line that we have going around the whole thing. And in this one, I'm not really seeing it as much. So I would probably take this into Maya and like add a couple of like extra bevels. I'm not sure if this is like the most up-to-date model that you have, but just like adding that sort of like extra stuff might not be a bad idea. Finally, the last couple of things that we can do is play a little bit with light temperature. So for instance, here I'm gonna go to my main light, or the secondary light. Was it this one? Yeah, this one right here, the secondary light. And I'm gonna turn on temperature and just push the Kelvin temperature a little bit towards the warm colors. And then I'm gonna go to light number 4, which was this last light that we added. I'm gonna turn temperature again, and I'm gonna push the Kelvin to the other side. So I'm gonna make this a lot like bluer, a little bit more blue. This is a very common trick. It's just like a very simple presentation trick. It's one of those things that can really make the whole scene look a little bit more interesting. I'm gonna even tint it a little bit here with color. And as you can see, we get this interesting blue color right here. So again, it might not seem like much, but some people do like resonate a little bit more with this, or like artistic renders, if you want to call them that way, to get a slightly like different result. Now, what else would I add? I feel like the rope needs a couple of like extra knots over here that we might need to incorporate. And now that I see it in this position, I do feel like adding a couple of extra scratches or a little bit more metal edge wear, especially on this back part right here, might not be a bad idea. So again, those are going to be decisions that you're going to have to take, my friend. But hopefully throughout this video, I was able to show not only to you, but everyone else watching, some of the things that you can consider to just push things a little bit more to the next level. The ones that I feel like were really missing on this one were a little bit more rust on the crevices of the element, a little bit more roughness variation on the metals, a little bit more detail on some of the metal like elements, and just like making it a little bit more obvious with the metal edgework. And again, just take this one out. This this 3D render right there, it's not helping you at all. Now, if you want to sort of like, I want to say push this to the next level, but if you want to make this thing just look a little bit better, adding a background is always a good idea. Like for this one, I would definitely do just like a top view render like this, and then a side view render, and just like a couple of night renders. But adding a floor is always like a good way to let people know how this thing would feel or look in a more realistic environment. Again, here inside of Marmoset, it's very easy to just go here to edit, plugins, generate primitives. I'm going to generate a plane, hit add. There we go. You can see that's a sort of like very big plane, so we're just gonna make it a little bit smaller so that it fits within the confines of my camera. On the camera, remember that you can click on this save frame option. That's what's gonna be rendered, so that way I can sort of like position this in such a way that we're covering things properly. Let's push this down a bit like that. Very important, this whole thing right here, right, like our whole crossbow, if it's resting on the ground, it needs to actually feel like it's resting on the ground. I'm gonna rotate a little bit, maybe even rotate it to the side, right? So that one of the borders touches that like the ground. It's gonna feel more realistic, right? Might not seem like much, but that little inclination there can really help. And then for instance here, I'm gonna go to my windows, to the libraries, and I'm gonna look for like a wood plane. It can be wood, it can be marble. Actually, yeah, let's go for like a floor. I usually recommend something that's not as obvious. For instance, like this flagstone path, right? Because if you do something that's a little bit too intense, then it becomes like difficult to, or it gets distracting. So I'm gonna position this right here. Of course, here on the tiling, I'm gonna tile this like, I don't know, like 4 times. There you go. So that, yeah, that seems like quite appropriate, I would say. I do want to darken this, so I'm gonna go to the color. I'm gonna add a little bit of a darker tone here. You can even tint it a little bit. So if you want to sort of like change the colors to emphasize the crossbow a little bit more, that's a good way to do it. Here I might be, again, because this is getting everything's becoming a little bit more darker, I'm inclined to go back to my HDRI and play a little bit with this thing right here. And of course, very importantly, we can always play with the focal length. So since this we want to make this a little bit more extreme, let's try going for like an 18mm. So this is gonna give us something that looks a little bit more exaggerated, right? Something like that. Let's go with 22 instead. And once more, now I would be inclined to use a little bit of vignette. Very soft, very soft and soft strength, so that we give way more emphasis to this guy right here. We gotta be careful though, because now I have to jump into a new camera here. The light, there was one light that was under the ground, right? This one right here, and this one right here. So we might need to sort of like bring these guys up to illuminate our element. Always being very mindful of how these things are affecting the ground plane. In particular, I really like, but we're gonna have to again sort of like flip it with where this thing is going to be. Go back to main camera. There we go. And we might need to play again with some of like the brightnesses and things like that to really illuminate things in a more sort of like natural way. Final little thing that we can do here, and this is just like a super extra little thing, is on the main camera, we can go to the color mapping, we can go to the curves, and if we go, for instance, to the blue curve, we can add a little bit more blue on the shadows and less blue on the highlights, like this. And then we can go to the reds and do the exact same opposite. So I'm gonna go and add a little bit more red to the top part, a little bit of red, less red here. So this is a little bit of like color grading that we can do. Now this wouldn't be like my clean render. This would be more like a beauty render. But it's one of those elements that we can definitely play a little bit with, and we're gonna be able to get a very sort of like artistic, interesting result. So it's up to you whether or not you want to keep the ground plane or not. I do feel like it looks way cleaner without the ground plane, but having the ground plane again is never a bad option. So there we go, my friends. I hope you guys liked this video. Again, this was already a really good piece. The things that I just mentioned were very nitpicky, very small little details that can hopefully add a little bit of an extra layer of detail to the whole thing. And especially here on the presentation, hopefully you can see how going from something like this that might look a little bit flat, especially here again, the metals and some of the elements, to something that looks a little bit more juicy, a little bit more cinematic, can definitely elevate the presentation of your portfolio pieces. With nothing else to add, if you guys like this video, let me know. This is something that we do every now and then, where I take someone's work and I try to show how I would approach or modify certain things. If again this is something that you like, let me know and we can do a little bit more of this here in the channel. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really helps the channel, and I'll see you very soon on our weekly live streams. That's pretty much it, my friends. Thank you very much. I'll see you back on the next one. Bye bye.